Imagine surrounding yourself with incredible women who've overcome challenges, they've rebounded after failures and disappointments, and women who are not afraid to shine their brilliance to make a mark in the world. These women support other like-minded women because they know there is plenty of opportunity for everyone and that together we really can make a difference, grow our businesses while have fun along the way. This is what Women in Leadership Podcast is all about. Welcome. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cross. Grab a cup of your favourite beverage, pull up a chair, and let's get this conversation started. And welcome to another episode. Now, my guest today says, if you know your wish, your want, and walk figure, you'll walk into any negotiation. So this is even if you are in business or you are an executive in corporate, you will walk into any negotiation with less stress and anxiety. And joining me to talk about this on today's show is Meggie Palmer. Now, Meggie, she founded PepTalkHer after her own experience of inequality at work. Now, she has personally coached women to receive raises as small as an extra $5 an hour. But guess what? It added up to over $1,000 over the year. Now, she's coached those women and even women all the way up to negotiate multiple six-figure raises. How does she do that? What did she coach her clients on? Well, we're going to find out in today's show. Now, PepTalkHer was founded out of frustration and possibility. The gender pay gap, it does exist, and data still says it's going to take hundreds of years for that to change. Now, PepTalkHer was started to take action and to galvanize change now. It's a 5-year mission to see 50-50 women in leadership and to close that gender pay gap. Now, specifically on today's show, Meggie is going to share the importance of knowing and remembering your worth. It really does start with that. What you can do today to set yourself up for performance review and future pay rise, no matter when your next pay increase conversation is, as well as how to calculate the exact number you should ask for when negotiating your pay. Welcome to the show, Meggie.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. You've sort of listed all of my favorite nerdy topics to talk about, like salary negotiations. So yeah, this will be a really juicy conversation.
Oh, it certainly will. And before we dive in, as I mentioned before, whether you are someone who is in the workplace and you're wanting to position yourself for a pay rise, for, that next level up, so to speak, even if you're an entrepreneur, everything that you're going to talk about today is very relevant because you're negotiating with clients, programs, packages, contracts, all those sorts of things. And it really does stem down to knowing and remembering your worth. Let's dive in and talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about it. And maybe it's something that everyone listening can reflect on. Like, do you feel like you understand truly what you're worth in market today, whether you're in a corporate role, whether you run your own business? Do you understand your value? And do you understand what that value could be? What price tag could you be putting on yourself? I think it's a very interesting question to frankly reflect on, because a lot of the times, we're very good at understanding what our friends are worth or our colleagues or our mentees, but we forget the value and the power that we actually have to negotiate for the money in the roles that we're doing because of the value that we contribute and we bring.
What are some of the blockages, if you will? What are some of the things that we need to be mindful of that we need to address first before we can even start to recognize what our worth is? Are there some commonalities that you see women can often get stuck on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all, we have to go back in time, really, Anne-Marie, and take a bit of a history lesson back to, it goes back to the patriarchy, to misogyny, the way that we were raised as little girls. My mom is a school teacher, and she even reflects on the way as a teacher, you treat girls and boys differently in the playground, not because you're a bad human as a teacher, but because, for example, the little boys might be running around, jumping on the monkey bars, hanging upside down, sort of flailing about, having a great time. And back when mum was teaching at schools, little girls back then used to wear dresses or skirts and they'd jump on the monkey bars and be hanging upside down. And the teachers would come up and say, oh, darling, your knickers are showing, hop off. Just a subtle, again, there's no malintention behind that, but just these subtle cues that we're given from such a young age that we're different. that we need to hold ourselves back, that our uniforms even, at a really small level gave us a message that we couldn't do all the things that maybe, our male classmates could do. And we had to sort of slow down for the cross country because our skirt would fly up or whatever the case may be. So it's these really small little messages that we got throughout our entire lives. If anyone listening had a similar upbringing to me, I'm a child of the 80s, and whilst on the one hand, I was raised to believe that girls and women can do anything, also the media was telling me a different story. The government policies were telling me a different story. And even today, as you mentioned earlier, right? Like the UN is saying that we're 200 years from equality still, so there's all these messages that we get, and all of those messages en masse, of course, add up to us questioning ourselves.
Mm.
And
It's
that's
interesting
cool.
that you say that because, often what we do is we look outward and there are going to be situations and circumstances that we come up against that is out of our control. But one of the things that we do have control over is, what are we telling ourselves? I remember years ago, and I can't recall the organization that admitted it, and I know that the media didn't disclose who it was, but one of the top corporations here in Australia actually said, we tend to offer women less because they tend to accept the first figure that is given to them. So when I was in the career industry, and I'm sure you do this with your clients, Meggie, is know that number, know what your wish is, know what your want is, and know what your walk figure is, know what is going on in the marketplace, and be mindful of what the range is. So do you think that really we need to look inward to see, is some of our beliefs, or are some of our beliefs inhibiting us from really getting out there, valuing our worth, and being able to showcase that as we negotiate our salaries?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we talk a lot about at PepTalkHer with our students is this concept of the wish, the want, and the walk figure. As you mentioned, there's a lot that we can't control in the world, in our career, in terms of we can't control unconscious bias. We can't control the mood that our boss is in that day. We can't control if we're in a recession. But what we can control is how we prepare ahead of a salary conversation. We can control how regularly we track our successes, so that we can reflect on those when it comes to performance review time. And that's the entire reason why we built the PepTalkHer app and why we keep it free, because it's part of our impact work. We want everyone listening to be using the app because it's kind of like, it's like a period tracker or a Fitbit, but instead of tracking your cycle or your exercise, it tracks your career wins, right? And it puts all of that data in one place so that you kind of have that, like brag book to kind of fall back on when you're maybe nervous ahead of a big meeting, or if you're feeling a bit anxious about your salary conversation, you can just reflect on that app, all of the wins in the one place, to make it easy for you to remember just how awesome you are. Because, even when we get external praise, we often discount it, or we don't internalize it. And so the purpose of kind of slowing down, recording those wins, screenshotting the emails with the positive feedback, and putting them in the PepTalkHer app is to remind yourself and use that nudge theory that actually you are pretty amazing. You're pretty awesome. You've done some great things. Sure, you make mistakes. We all do. But on balance, you've had amazing successes and they deserve to be rewarded.
Yeah, I love that idea. You know why? Because when I reflect back, when I worked in the career industry, one of the things that we would often find with people who were then looking for other jobs, they tended to wait until a circumstance force them to find another job. They might have been made redundant, or there was changes and they just couldn't stand working in that same environment. And then it was a mad scramble to compile all of the things that they'd been doing. And life goes on, doesn't it? Life is busy. So often we forget to track what was going on. And if we do that at the time, keep it all in that one place, we're able to go back and update resumes and all the other things that we know that we need to do. And it also does remind us, how often do we rush from one project to another without actually stepping back and looking at what did we do, what impact did we have, and what is that result now been for our organization, the people that we work with? We don't tend to do that very often, do we, Meggie?
No, we don't do it enough. And, I'm sort of reminded, my grandpa used to always say, stop and smell the roses. And I take that literally. Like, I live in Manhattan now in New York City, and I every time I see a rose bush, it's kind of annoying for my partner and my baby because I always stop and smell the roses because they're beautiful. And also it reminds you to slow down. And I think, you can sort of apply that to your career too. When you have a success or a great project, like, just stop for a minute And let's just take that in. And maybe you need to like praise your colleagues or your boss who kind of worked with you on that. Because, we're always like more, like the next client, the next lead, the next deal. And that's great. And I'm here for it. And obviously I want all of our ambitious listeners to have huge success. But if you don't sort of accept and acknowledge the successes along the journey, then that destination can always seem further and further away, right? So for me, the destination, for me, like that journey process is kind of the destination. Do you know what I mean? Like I try and just like enjoy those small rose smelling moments career-wise as I go along, because that is such a more enjoyable process than sort of sitting here and like, oh, in 5 years I'll celebrate, or in 7 years I'll celebrate,
That's a great approach to have, I think, because so many of us, and I can say myself included, we're so focused on that goal and outcome, we forget
Aren't
to
we?
celebrate
Yeah.
all of the milestones. And
Yeah.
sometimes, the milestone or the goal changes because of certain circumstances. It's like, math would say, don't just write the answer down, show your calculations, because you may still get some marks for the calculations, even though the answer was wrong.
The thought
And in a
process.
situation of career, life, and business,
Mhm.
the destination may be different than what we had
Mhm.
assumed, because the original destination was not really the best for us. And we end up in a place that we had no idea, but we followed those successes and they've showed us where we shine. Yes?
Yeah, and it's like what do they say? There's this great quote, and I wish I could remember it verbatim, Anne-Marie, but it's basically like, when you reflect on your career journey, when you look back, all those twists and turns and quote unquote wrong turns make sense. Like they were wrong at the time, they were disappointing at the time, it was hurtful at the time. But with hindsight, what a wonderful thing, right? And, if I hadn't found out that I was being paid less than my male journalist colleagues, I may not have migrated to the United States. Like who knows?
Yes.
My life would look very different. And so I think actually taking the space to actually just reflect, and again, maybe this is something our listeners can do today, is just like, is there a pivot point in your career that you can actually reflect on and think, I was so disappointed I was overlooked, or I was so upset when I was made redundant, or when I got fired or sacked. However, now 5, 15, 50 years down the track, actually, I can see that led me to where I am today. And I hope for our listeners that that's actually been a fruitful process, albeit difficult at the time, no doubt. But yeah, I think, we can only control our attitude and our response to these twists and turns that our career takes us on, which in so many cases are out of our control, particularly for women and people from
Yes.
marginalized communities,
Yeah. So true. I mean, you've shared how important it is for us to continue to track and monitor, because then we confirm all of the things that we've been able to contribute to. And when we're talking about setting ourselves up for performance reviews, or even opportunities to step up, or maybe a role on a project that you've really wanted to, one of the things, and I'm sure you've heard this too, there may be a list of 10 requirements. And often you hear, if a woman has only got 8 of those, well, it's not, not for me. Yet a man might see that. And of course, I'm generalizing. There are, both sides of the camp can have this issue too, because I've spoken to a lot of men who go, we actually feel a lot like you too. Sometimes we just don't show it. We're better at not showing it, which is my point. Some men will go, yeah, no worries at all, I can learn that kind of a thing, and put themselves forward. How often do you find yourself encouraging and empowering women to say, put your ring in the hat, throw your ring in the hat, so to speak, because you've got the opportunity there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to confidence, doesn't it, in a lot of ways? And I think, all of these conversations are so important, and it's my life's work and all that sort of stuff. And yet I also just want to acknowledge, for anyone who's listening, if you're having these feelings of I don't belong, I'm not good enough, some folks term it imposter syndrome, I just also want to acknowledge that it's actually not your fault, right? That this is a result of what society, the media, the workplaces for so many generations have told us. These, these subtle signals that we've been given have led to this situation where we're in now. And it's interesting, a majority of the community at PepTalkHer identifies as female. But I will say we have had at least one male identifying student go through our group coaching program. And interestingly, he was telling me he's gay. And he was telling me that a lot of his gay friends also experience imposter syndrome in the workforce, which I thought was very interesting when he explained that to me. And so, yes, I hear from a lot of women that there are experiences where they don't feel good enough, or they're not ready yet. And I think a quote that's kind of helped me, and when I reflect back, Anne-Marie, on my career, I think I try not to have regrets, but equally, if I could tell my younger self something, it would really be like, you are enough and you're ready for that next step. I think often we're waiting for someone to give us permission, or we're waiting for like an MBA, or we're waiting for some number or title to kind of go for it. And I just kind of think the quote for me that sort of shifted everything was, leap and the net will appear. And I love that, because sometimes you have to take a leap of faith, and you might not get that job, and you might get rejected. And you know what? Rejection is just redirection. And that's exciting, right? Because
Yes.
that's where growth happens and new opportunities. And I remember back when I was a correspondent, I applied for a job. I was definitely out of my depth and too young, but I just threw my hat in the ring and I didn't get the job. But I did get a mentor who genuinely has contributed to, at least 3 of my roles that I've had in my career, right? And so had I not applied for that job, he wouldn't have known who I was, or potentially what I was capable of, or seen my potential, which I couldn't see in myself. So I think also finding your champions and your cheerleaders, surrounding yourself with people who do respect you, who do see your possibility, even when you don't see it in yourself, is helpful, because they can cheer you on. When you're having a bad day, which we all do, those folks you can lean on to kind of support you and get you through.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful reminder. Thank you for sharing that, Meggie, because there may be organizations that you wouldn't want to end up working for anyway, because the values, the culture of that company just would not be a good fit for you. And something that I've heard time and time again was that, if there are organizations and you can't find one, maybe you are a champion to create an organization that brings everything that you want and creates that community, such as what you said earlier. And we introduced you. You started PepTalkHer out of frustration because there were things that you weren't seeing and experiencing within the workplace. So you thought, you know what, I'm going to stand up for this. I'm going to bring a voice, create a platform to inspire and empower others to work towards that as well. So maybe, we've got someone that is sitting in a workplace to say, you know what, you know why you're not seeing it? Yours is the platform to build, because that voice is yours to share.
Well, and I think that's true as well in terms of being a champion for others. So I think about myself, I identify as a white woman, and I, yes, have experienced inequality 100%, and it sucks. Having said that, we know when it comes to the statistics in terms of the gender pay gap, it's terrible for women across the board. It's around 15 to 20% in the Western world. But for women of color, those data points are significantly worse. Right. And so I really believe, Anne-Marie, that all of us actually have a responsibility to pay forward our privilege and the power that we have in the workforce. And we might not feel like it's much, but when we're in meetings and something that's said that's inappropriate, when we see behavior that's not okay, when we have capacity to create change or speak up or check in on someone afterwards, we actually have a responsibility to do that, because it's very easy to say, well, that's HR's problem, or that's the CEO's problem, or, all those kinds of things. But actually, that's really just an excuse, because all of us have capacity to influence and create change. And I think we forget that sometimes, especially in big corporate cultures and structures. But I don't kind of buy that. I actually think we need to put it back onto ourselves and say, well, what can I do this week at work
us
to help
being
someone
there,
else?
isn't it? We contribute. Actually, we're not saying something, not even
Totally.
rallying around that person. That can make a world of difference. Knowing, hey, someone else saw this. I experienced it. Someone else saw this, and so that is not okay. And speaking up, and together we really are better and able to really make that change. Something else that I often hear as well, and this is to do with contributing to the workplace. You might have come up with an idea or driven something, and then all of a sudden someone comes and takes it, runs off with it, and it's their idea, and there's no recognition whatsoever. And it's like, how do we deal with that? But if other people have seen that, they can rally around that person and say, actually, this person contributed to that. And, so to make that aware and be aware to some of the leadership group, if that is not the case. Do you
100%.
find that that's something that women tend to struggle with too? Ideas that are taken, they've shared things, and they've not been recognized?
Yeah, and like studies have shown this, right? When you are the only in a room, in a group, in a leadership committee, whatever, maybe in a company, there might be folks with us today who are the only Indigenous person in a tech company. They might be the only Hispanic leader at a large SaaS company, right? And so whether you're a female or another minority and you don't have support around you, it's very lonely. And it's also a lot easier for other folks to steal your ideas, and it's less likely that other people will back you up. And so what happens is, and Julie Bishop speaks very openly about this, the former Australian Foreign Minister, about when she was in cabinet, when she was the only woman in cabinet, she found that a lot of the time her ideas would get picked up by someone else three minutes later, lo and behold. But when there were two in cabinet, all of a sudden they would sort of tag team and say, I'm just going to circle back there because Julie actually mentioned that earlier, or whatever the case may be. And so again, I think just being aware, because unconscious bias is a terrible beast, and we all have biases that we bring to our families, our friends, the workplace, our communities, right? And so by actually being very aware and conscious of how they're showing up, how maybe we're inadvertently hurting other folks, is really powerful. It's not always comfortable, I will say. It can be a bit awkward to reflect on, honestly. But again, it's through that uncomfortableness that we'll see growth and change. And I really believe that like those small ripples of change in behavior will turn into a tidal wave of change eventually, we hope.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's our motto and our mission, one episode, one podcast, one message at a time, because someone will hear it, someone else will pick up. And sometimes there are other people who are thinking the very same thing, and once they see someone else step forward, they go, that's right. And then all of a sudden there's people coming out of the woodwork going, yes, they just needed that initial person who was courageous and brave enough to say, you know what, this is not okay. We need to address this.
Totally.
I want to dive in a little bit more to what we opened the show about, that quote, your wish, your want, and walk figure. Can you talk a little bit about that? What is the differences between those, just to give some context so that we've got some kind of firm idea on how we use that strategy next time we are going for a pay rise?
Yeah, well, I mean, anyone who's listening can just sort of do a bit of a self-check on this. Like when I say the word negotiation, well, hang on, Anne-Marie, let's do it, you and I. When I say the word, if I said to you, okay, Anne-Marie, you have to go in and negotiate for a new corporate contract in 5 minutes.
Yes.
How would you feel?
Well, my mind immediately goes to, okay, ... What are they looking for? What are we offering? What are the key points that really are going to get them over the line? So I immediately go into strategy mode and thinking mode, and am I prepared?
And that's that preparation phase, right? That is the most important thing. It's not sexy. It's not a quick fix. I don't have a tablet that you can take that'll make, all of that go away. The reality is that when it comes to negotiation, the more prepared you are, firstly, the better you're going to feel walking in, and that energy will be picked up. The more confident you're going to feel, and the better result that you will gain, right? Because as you mentioned, Anna-Marie, straight away you were thinking, what does the other person need and want? What do I need and want? And what could some sort of a, meeting in the middle look like potentially? And so when it comes to the wish, want, walk, the WWW numbers, we like to call them, it's basically doing some of the mental gymnastics before you step into that negotiation. So before you call the client, before you attend the sales meeting, before you walk into your boss's office to discuss pay, I need you to do some work beforehand, right? Ideally, you'd be using the PepTalkHer app and you'd be tracking your successes every single week, because if you do that, come performance review, you're going to have 40, 50 things like in one place that are awesome, that showcase how amazing you are, the value you've contributed, the money you've saved or made for the team. So that's powerful. Now, if you haven't got that, that's okay, because the next best time to start is today, right? So you can reflect on, okay, what happened at work this week? Maybe if you've got a really good memory, you can be like, what happened at work last week, last month? But the reality is that we all have memories that are not great, because there's a lot of Netflix to watch. There's a lot of friends to catch up with. We've got other stuff in our brain, right? And so if you don't track those successes in the moment, it's a lot harder to recall the specifics, who said what were the percentage year-on-year increases, how many SEO clicks did you increase the company's, web presence by, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to do that. That's the first step. And then the second part of preparation is knowing your numbers. So knowing what is my wish figure, my want figure, and my walk figure. So let's start with the fun one. Wish, as you would expect, a dollar sign that you wish you would get paid, that you wish your boss would say yes to, or you wish your corporate client would happily pay. So everyone can do this now. Think about your wish salary, like a dream salary. You can close your eyes and just think like, what would that look like on my tax return? What would that number be? Right? So think about what, not what you're getting paid now, not a little bit more, like a wish, like a lot, you know? I want you to think whatever number you're thinking, and I want you to add GST at least, add tax at the very least. Add 10 or 20% to whatever you were thinking, because I'm pretty sure you weren't thinking enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's your wish number on one end of the spectrum. Then we can flip back down to the other end, and that's your walk number. And that's the number where you're like, do you know what? I'm out. I'm not accepting this deal, or I am begrudgingly going to take this pay increase, but I will start looking for another job immediately. It's essentially the number where you don't feel valued. You're not happy to jump out of bed and work hard for, right? It's a number that doesn't match up and align with what you know your value is. And then, of course, your want figure is somewhere between the two. It doesn't have to be equidistant in the middle. It's a number where you think it's really fair. You're excited to work hard for that amount of money, and you think that there's a fair exchange of value, right? So if you've understood what those numbers are ahead of time, then all of a sudden when you walk into that negotiation or when you log into the Zoom, you feel much more prepared, because when they immediately throw out a number that's bigger than your wish, straight away you're like, okay, we're cooking with gas. That's where we're at. I need to go higher. You know, straight away you can assess where you're at.
Yeah.
Or if straight away the number is significantly low, you know that you're going to have to say straight up, hey, candidly, we're really far apart in terms of the numbers. So I just want to sense check, is there an alignment here? Is there room to move with your budget? Because if not, perhaps we're better off to circle back next financial year.
Yeah.
You know, or whatever the case may be. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And I love that you've given an example, because, you know, so often we think that a negotiation is they give a number, we accept, or we don't. But often the case, it's not the case at all. We have the opportunity to go back and have the conversation. And sometimes it is because we're not prepared, or we feel awkward in doing that. But it is a negotiation, and the language that you used was great. Hey, the figure that you had and the figure that I had, for if I look and see what the role entails or what the job entails versus, you know, what will be expected of me. I'm just wondering, when I see what others are being paid for this, the compensation seems to be a bit of a gap. So I'm wondering, you know, what would the difference? Are your expectations a little less? You know, the conversation around that, have that conversation, because, and this is something that we used to stress all the time too, an organization does not want someone working for them who feels undervalued and underpaid.
100%.
They are not going to bring their best to the table. And the next time an opportunity comes across their path, they're going to take it. And that organization is going to be stupid to think, hey, we can find someone else, because the cost to them to find, hire, and get someone up to speed is going to 10 times more often the case, depending on how high up the leadership. And so I think both sides of the table should compensate fairly and remunerate fairly for what someone's worth.
Well, and to your point, you know, when it comes to the preparation piece, if I don't accept this offer, how much will my company have to pay in recruiting fees to hire another me, right? So nothing of the fact that all of your institutional knowledge potentially will leave. You know, it'll take 3 to 6 months to hire. Then someone has to train the new person up, which is annoying and takes 90 days. So, you know, really there's a brain drain of anywhere from 3 to 12 months when someone leaves a business, right? And so in many cases, candidly, it's cheaper for them to give you a pay increase than it is for them to recruit someone else.
Yeah.
But often we forget that, because we give the employer all of the power, right? And it goes both ways too. You know, I think certain companies, if you were asking for a pay increase in the middle of COVID, you had to read the room, right? Because some companies were not in a position to do that, regardless of how amazing you were, right? And so I think it's always about context, Anne-Marie, and also thinking about non-monetary things as well. So I'll give you an example. One of my friends in Melbourne, one of my clients, they've become a friend after being a client, but they worked in an architecture firm, and they were asked to be furloughed, I think from 100% wages down to 60%. And she came to me for advice, and we talked about it, and she loves the firm. She wanted to stay. That's fine. But she still put in place boundaries. So that's what we talked about. So we were like, let's review this in 3 months. And so let's schedule ahead of time a 3-month touch base point. I'm happy to sign the contract for 3 months. And then let's revisit it again at 6 months.
Yeah.
So that you're not 12 months down the line still earning 60%, right? You want to actually it doesn't cost them anything to have a touch-based meeting with you in 3 months. But you've got to do some of that, as I say, those mental gymnastics ahead of time to say, well, what would they be willing to do? Are you open to me going down to 4 days a week as a result? Can I work remotely 3 days out of the 5? Or, what else is valuable to you that's not going to cost them anything? That's fine. Happy to do it. Can I have 3 weeks at Christmas, a paid vacation instead of 2? What else could you creatively come up with such that it's easy for the other party to say yes?
Yeah, I love those ideas. What we would often say to organization or to individuals who are starting up with startup organizations who may not have yet the capital to be able to pay is to negotiate those time periods, because if you knew you can contribute and that contribution is going to ensure that the company continues to gain market share, then have that, in your contract to review 3 months, 6 months, whatever that may be. You can do that in a business point of view too. If you know that you're working with a client and at the moment they're stretched with funds, you can say, well, look, we'll start off with this. We'll come back in 90 days, 3 months, and then we'll review, because you know that you're going to be able to help that organization or that client to increase revenue, which ultimately can then be negotiated into your pay. We could continue to talk about this for so long. I know we've just scratched the surface, but I think we've at least touched some of the key points that's going to get people inspired to say, you know what, I'm not going to cringe from negotiation. All of the things that Meggie has shared, and certainly let's get a copy of the app. Share a little bit more about how people can get that app, how they can connect with you. What's the best way?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the PepTalkHer app is on all of the app stores. Google very kindly did a feature on us recently, as did the Apple App Store, which was awesome. So yeah, it's free. You can download it, check it out. Let me know any feedback. Always happy to hear it. And don't be a stranger. I'm on LinkedIn, as Anne-Marie is as well. We're both very active on there. I'm on Instagram at PepTalkHer. So let me know your takeaways from today's conversation between Anne-Marie and I. We would love to hear from you. And let us know what you're going to do differently when you approach your performance review this year. Anyone who's wanting to, really boost their confidence this year around how much to charge, we've also got a free challenge that I run personally twice a year. There's another one coming up super soon. So you can sign up to that, PepTalkHer.com/challenge. And I'm excited to stay in touch with the listeners.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for coming on the show.
An absolute pleasure. All the best.
Hey, it's Anne-Marie. Before I go, are you a coach or a consultant who feels like the world's best kept secret? Your experience is vast, yet secretly you're frustrated because despite all of your hard work, you're just not getting the visibility, the recognition, or new clients you'd hope for, and you don't know why? I've created a free resource that'll help you build visibility, generate leads, and enroll dream clients with ease, because you're seen as a trusted authority, even in a crowded marketplace. And you've positioned yourself as the choice versus just a choice for your dream client. To get started, go to annemariecross.com/gift. That's annemariecross.com/gift.